we'll be talking about NextGen projects and what they mean for your Jira Cloud apps. So first of all, Jira is complicated. I think we all know this. It's a bit obvious. You can think of it like Lego, maybe. There's lots of little pieces, and if you try really hard, you can build something really beautiful out of it. But a lot of the time, if you don't really have the instructions, you're going to struggle. And a lot of our new customers really struggle with Jira's global settings and project configuration. And because of that, we make your apps look bad. You have to deal with this complexity that Jira has and pass that on to your users. But this isn't what we want Jira to be known for. We want to build a Jira that's simple, powerful, and intuitive. And we want to take all the features that make Jira great and that our users love and put them into the hands of all of our users. We really want to solve customer problems without the mental burden, and that's our goal with NextGen projects. But first, I want to give you an overview into what we'll go through in this presentation today. So first, we're going to touch on Jira Classic. So I want to get an idea of how well people know Jira. Can you raise your hand if you've built an app for Jira? Jira Cloud specifically? Or actually any. Or what about if you've configured a project or configured an instance for Jira? OK, cool. So a lot of people know pretty well. So I can go a little bit quicker in this section. After we've done that, we'll learn about Jira NextGen, why we did it, the reasons behind it, and the differences between the two. And finally, we'll go through how you can keep your apps compatible. Oh, yeah, so this is supposed to be like Pokemon. You're kind of going to evolve throughout the presentation to that muscly thing at the end, but it's a very strange analogy, so I'll leave it there. So let's start with Jira Classic. And before we dive into everything, let's get some ground rules set. So let's go through the fundamentals of Jira. The base object in Jira is the issue, really. And issues are made up of a lot of different parts. So we've got the project, where they're contained, fields, how we store data, screens, which are a collection of fields, the status, storing the state of the issue, workflow, how to get between different states. And finally, we have the issue type, is how we bring everything together in Jira. And so from this, users kind of get an idea of the model of Jira, and they feel like it looks kind of like this, right? This is how it feels. Like in each project, you have a bunch of issue types. With the issue types, they contain screens and fields within those. They each contain a workflow and some statuses. So people kind of think of Jira like this, but this picture is really misleading. It's not actually how it works. There isn't any hierarchy between all these objects. It actually looks like this. So all those different entities live at the global level in Jira, completely independent of each other, completely independent of the project. So how do we get from this to that image, to the issue that we have? We do this by schemes. So schemes are a mapping to help us build up the configuration of the project. So let's see how we can build that. So the main schemes we have are, for example, issue types. They get mapped to a project by the issue type scheme. Statuses get used in workflows, which are then mapped to issue types in the workflow scheme. Fields get used in screens, which are mapped to issue views on the screen scheme, which are mapped to issue types on the issue type screen scheme. So if you're starting to feel overwhelmed, it's pretty normal. Even for me, I've been at Atlassian for 4 or 5 years, and it took me quite a while to get my head around this. But our new customers really struggle with this. But what this gives us, what the benefit is super granular configuration. So it gives a lot of power into how you want to share your project's configuration across multiple projects. But as Uncle Ben says to Peter Parker in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And that responsibility falls onto the shoulders of our admins, of Jira admins. They have a lot of responsibility to understand and successfully configure projects. So let's consider when we have multiple projects. Yes, so we've got multiple projects now. How do we build up the configuration for another one of our projects? Well, we could, one idea is we could just completely share the schemes. So those schemes we have, point them to another project, they have the exact same configuration. So changes to one are going to affect both, things like that. Another option is you could kind of create new schemes, and in that case, they're completely independent now, so one project won't affect another. Or you can mix and match. And a hint here, this is kind of when problems start arising. By mixing and matching things, it's good that there's this granularity that you can do this if you like. But for people, if they're not really managing it that well, it can cause a lot of confusion. This picture is still simplified. There's a lot more entities and schemes that do exist, and when I start to include those, it gets even more out of hand. And it's this complex web of relationships that causes a lot of confusion and problems for our admins. And not even Spider-Man can deal with this web. So new users, when they enter Jira, they might come across this kind of idea and actually feel like they're seeing something more like this, which leaves them feeling a bit small and powerless with a huge task ahead of them. Oops, and I can't get back. But yes, anyway, there's plenty of times when admins have probably, after they've been asked to configure Jira, they try to avoid it as much as they can. Like this cute dog here. I really like this video. So let's look at some concrete examples of how this actually affects users. So I've got a quiz with a few things. Let's see if you can work out what will go wrong. So first example. Imagine we have this screen here. It's got just a few fields on it, and the people using the screen decide, we don't need impact anymore, our team's not impactful, let's get rid of the impact field, and we're the only ones using that screen in our screen scheme, it should be fine. So they get rid of impact field. Should be all good, right? It works for them. Success. Can you think of what could have gone wrong? Well, it actually broke someone else's project because it was being used as a transition screen there, and it required impact to be filled out. Now the issues are stuck. Okay, broken. Let's look at another example. So say we have a simple workflow, and everyone using this workflow decides, see, pending, they don't like pending. We don't like that name anymore. We want to change the name of pending to pending.io because that's a really cool thing to do. So we update the name, but we can't rename the status because it's being used somewhere else. So we have to create a new status, chuck it in the workflow, and map all the issues across. Can you think of things that could go wrong here? So everything is the answer. So lots of things can break. For example, boards. Boards map a status to a column. If the status isn't mapped correctly, issues will disappear. Approvals from Jira Service Desk. Jira Service Desk has a feature called approvals that live on the status. Now that the status has been changed, the approval step's gone, everyone gets a Ferrari for free because they don't need to go through approvals anymore. And filters or queues. If you have any JQL pretty much based on a certain status and you change it, it's going to change the results. So these are a lot of things that admins need to keep in mind when they make any update to a project. They have to keep a lot of these things in mind or everything can go on fire. So enough destructive examples. Let's think about something constructive. So imagine you're an admin at Atlassian and the people for Atlas Camp decide, oh, we want to track all our talks in Jira. So we want you to create a new issue type called conference talk, and it'll track the number of attendees, and we need a new field for that. So basically, you want to end up with something like this. How can you actually get here? Let's go back a couple screens and see how what we'd have to do to achieve this. So we'd have to create a new issue type and associate it with the issue type scheme, create a new field and a new screen, associate them, use the screen in a new screen scheme, and then use that screen scheme in our issue type screen scheme to map everything together. It's quite a lot of steps to achieve something. I have a video of it, but for time, I'll start playing it, but it's at 4 times speed and it goes really quickly, but it kind of gives you an idea of all the different places you need to go to. There's 9 steps altogether, but I'll move on just for the sake of time. And what I want to highlight here is that we noticed there are problems with Jira Classic in the complexity that it brings. And we've tried a lot of things to try and solve this, but we got to a point where we realized we need to reconsider this from the fundamental level. So yeah, congrats, you've learned about Jira Classic. Now let's look at NextGen. So we noticed this problem. We thought, how do we make this better? How do we users love that customizability that we provide. How do we bring that to more users, make it more simple, more intuitive? And we realized we needed to talk to customers to make sure we did this right. So we did. We talked to customers, talked to them not about only how they use Jira, but how they think about Jira. and we found two surprising things. The first one was about schemes. We found that admins didn't really take advantage of that really granular capability that schemes provides. Either they kind of had a cookie cutter set of schemes that they applied to every project, they just shared it all the time, or if they didn't do that, everything kind of got messy. So that was the first learning we had. The second one was about Jira admins. We found there's a real need to unburden Jira admins. They deal with a lot of change requests that they don't want or need to make a lot of the time. And we also found lots of users who would love to create and maintain their own projects, and admins willing to let them if they could. So we took all this information away, and we thought, how do we actually get there? How do we make things better? And we came up with a new model, which is NextGen Projects. Yes, so NextGen was born, and with that, we've redesigned the conceptual model of Jira from the ground up and validated it for scale in customer interviews. So what is NextGen? So NextGen is an alternative to classic projects. They can be created by anyone, and their configuration is completely contained within the project. So changes to one project won't affect another. But what's actually changing? Okay, sorry. So remember this slide from before, showing all that schemes and stuff? Let's see what happens when we introduce NextGen. So everything's at the global level here, but we can see with NextGen projects, all those entities that lived at the global level actually live within the project itself. So let's dive into one now. So since all those entities are within the project, we don't actually need schemes. We know what entities we want to use for this project. We don't need to map them anymore. So schemes, they're gone. We don't need them. How cool is that, right? So we're not only simplifying that way, we're taking the opportunity to rethink how Jira works. And because of that, we're simplifying further by removing the concept of screens. So fields now live directly, they're associated directly to issue types. And what this leaves us with is a conceptual model that aligns a lot closer with people's mental model of how Jira works. And due to that, we can do two really great things. Firstly, we can simplify the user experience quite a lot in configuring a project. And secondly, because the user experience is simple, because the configuration is kind of contained within the project, it means we can let anyone perform this. So any user can create and maintain their own projects because we don't have to worry about it affecting anyone else, and we can trust that they'll be able to understand how to do that. By doing this, all users can access the power of Jira. So since I didn't show the whole video last time, this is a video of what it looks like in NextGen. It's a lot less steps. So let's start. And the first thing to notice is we can go straight to project settings to make our project configuration changes. We don't need to go to Jira settings. Since we're in a service desk project, issue types are actually called request types here. So we head to the request types page. And this is the new request type configuration page in NextGen Projects. I'll pause the video here for a sec and we have a little talk about it. So on the left-hand side, you can see we have a list of current request types and ways to easily add new ones. In the middle, we have the configuration section. Basically, you can choose what fields you want, what order you want them in, extra information like that. On the right, we can easily create new fields and directly associate them with the issue type or use previously created fields for that project. And at the top, there's a button to edit the workflow directly from this page too. So it brings all those entities together on one page rather than spreading them out all across Jira. So if we resume, let's see how hard it is to create that issue type we wanted, conference talk, and add that new field. So we'll create the issue type. We don't need description, drag it off. We want a new field, a new number field called like the people attending the talk. So all we have to do is drag that in, click save, and we're done. So it's a lot easier to understand and a lot easier to make changes to your project. And what that does is it unlocks Jira for all of our users pretty much. So yep, if we have a look, did it work? It did. Cool. So with that, you've now learnt about the reasons why we started investing in NextGen and what we've ended up with. Let's see, yeah, evolve to the next step. So next up, we're going to learn now about how you can keep your app compatible between both NextGen and classic projects. So for all this to happen, we did have to make some changes, and so some assumptions that have been true for all of Jira's life have had to change. Let's go through some of the main ones now. The first one is about that scoping of entities. So entities that previously in Classic were global and had unique names, for example, issue types and statuses. In NextGen, entities are project scoped, and they only have to have a unique name within their project. So what effect might this have on your apps? Well, if your app is relying on certain entities being uniquely named, you might notice some odd behavior. It also means that any entities that you create at the global level that your app needs will now need to be created at the project scope level as well. Let's look at a common bug that we saw coming up in some apps because of this change. This bug is mostly about showing the relevant entities at the right time. So it's about leaking project entities accidentally out of the project scope context, or revealing global entities incorrectly within a NextGen project. So what do I mean by this? Let's go to an example. So think about, imagine you have an app that each project you need to configure, like, I want to fill in this field for some reason. So if you're within a classic project and your user is selecting a field from a dropdown, for example, you don't want to show NextGen fields because they won't be able to be used in that project. So selecting from a global context, you shouldn't be showing project scope fields. And the reverse is also true. If you're within a NextGen project and you don't want to be showing classic entities that can't be used in that project. We'll go through API changes we've made later to fix this so that you can update your apps. But for now, let's go on to the second assumption, the main assumption that's changed, which is who can create and maintain projects and entities in Jira. In Classic, only admins could do this. In NextGen, any user can, as long as their admin lets them. So there is an option in global settings. If admins want to turn off NextGen, they can. So what impact might this have on apps? Basically, more users. So since more people can create and configure their own projects, they might be exposed to more of your apps if they're installed on that instance. So let's go through some of the ecosystem changes. I'll just take a drink. First, we'll go through the REST API, then module integration points, finally, some more deeper conceptual changes we've made. So first, REST API. So the first endpoint I want to talk about is getting the projects on an instance. So here's an example response from our get project endpoint. And what we've added here is the style property. So the style property just tells you whether it's a NextGen project or a classic project. And what can you actually use this for? Well, basically changing your app's behavior based on the type of project. So if you need to change the way your app behaves, reveal or hide certain functionality in either project type, or determine which APIs you have to use this endpoint for that. Next, I want to talk about the read endpoints for all of our entities. So these are things like issue types, fields, statuses. Here's a response, an example response from our get issue type endpoint. And it returns both global and project scoped entities, so from both Classic and NextGen. I want to point out the scope property here. So what this does is it indicates the scope of the object. In this case, it's scoped to a certain project, and you can see the information about the project there. Global entities won't have this scope property, so that's how you can determine which ones are from Classic. The second thing to note is the names. So as I mentioned before, names no longer need to be unique within NextGen projects across multiple projects. So this endpoint can now return things with the same name. So which entities support this? Right now, we've built out support for most entities. As for workflows, workflow functionality is still being heavily worked on in NextGen projects. So it's not really quite ready yet for us to build support for that. But what can you actually, so yeah, you'll hear more about that in the months to come. But what can you do with what we have so far? This is what we'll use to fix that bug I mentioned earlier. Showing entities in the relevant context is the main use case of this. Finally, the last area of the REST API I'd like to talk about is writing to those entities. So creating, updating, deleting. Unfortunately, this is still coming soon. We are working on it right now. I'd really love to reveal this functionality, but you'll have to wait a little bit longer. So right now, there's no way to create, update, or delete entities within a NextGen project. We are looking for feedback here on how you'd like this to work. So there's a link at the end of my slides, and definitely take a photo then. We really would love to hear your feedback there. Okay, so REST API done. Let's talk about modules. So the first one I want to talk about is where your app lives in project settings, its configuration page. So previously, everything was just shown in the project settings sidebar. In NextGen projects, it's nested within this app subnav. So this shouldn't actually change anything about the way your app works, but you may just need to adjust any docs you have, URLs that point to your app's configuration page, etc. Next, for Jira software, they've built a new boards and backlog page. So with that comes new integration points. You can add a button to the top right of your board using the location Jira software board tools. And you can also do the same on your backlog using Jira software backlog tools. And finally, the new issue view. So glances and panels work in NextGen projects. You can continue to use those. Those are the things that open up into a little iframe. As for issue fields, there's still work to do here. So we're working on it right now, though. Cool. So we're not just reaching parity with Classic. We're also taking this opportunity with NextGen to simplify and platformize as many features as we can and make things scalable. So what are the conceptual changes we're actually making? First one is we're improving the structure of relationships between parents and children. So this is about, what I'm really talking about here is epics, stories, subtasks, things like that. The issue type hierarchy that we have. In Classic, there isn't really a hierarchy. All those issue types, they kind of live at the same level, and we kind of like force a hierarchy on it. We treat epic like this magic issue type, and we like push it up and say, if you know, you can link to an epic using the epic link field on a story. And with subtask, it's kind of similar, but it's a little bit different. We push subtask down, and we say, you know, you can link to it via the subtask field or use the parent field on the subtask. So already this is a bit inconsistent. It's not great, but it gets worse when we add in Portfolio. So Portfolio is another product in Jira that adds its own issue type, which lives above epic. So if I click it, yep. So once we add in Portfolio, we can link to that from an epic using the parent link field, and you can see this isn't really scalable. So with NextGen projects, we're introducing a thing called issue type hierarchy. And what that means is all regular issue types, like story, live at level 0. Anything like epic issue types live at level 1, whereas subtasks live at level -1. And there's one easy way to find the parent of a certain issue. You can just access the parent field on that issue. So this single standard allows us to scale the concept to where it couldn't go before. We can not only scale vertically, but also horizontally. So we can have multiple issue types at the epic level if we need that later. But we're still exploring the use cases of this. We haven't yet built out something that makes use of all this scalability, but the API is already available for you to use today. So here's an example response from our new NextGen only endpoint for an issue type hierarchy for a project. What this gives you is the hierarchy of the issues for that project. So if you want to find issues at the base level, you just have a look at level 0 there, find all the issue types. If you want to find all the epic level issue types, have a look at level 1. And it gives you a consistent way to find the parents and children of a certain issue. So if you need to find the parent of any issue, regardless of if it's subtask, story, epic, all you have to do is have a look at the parent field. So get the issue fields from the issue endpoint, have a look at parent. If you want to find the children, just do a JQL search for parent equals issue key. So what's the benefit of all this? You can more consistently find parents and children of issues within a NextGen project. The next one I want to talk about is request types in Jira Service Desk. So I don't know how many of you know Jira Service Desk, but request types are an extra layer that we add on top of issue types. So I have a picture here. So request types provide kind of like a lens on top of the issue type to say, I want my customers to fill out these certain fields for this issue type when they raise a request through that path. But we found this concept of separating them out confused and added a lot of complexity that our new customers struggled with especially. So in NextGen, we've combined them, and issue types are request types. So what does that mean for apps? It changes the way you'll interact with them in the API. Firstly, you'll no longer have to worry, at least, about the difference between them. As for the existing request type endpoints that are specific to request types, the read one will continue to work, but as we haven't built out writing capability, the write one won't. But once we do build the issue type endpoint, that is the one place you can go. So by doing this, when you're interacting with Jira Service Desk by API, you can use a lot more platform APIs. And with that, you've learned about the main changes in NextGen for our ecosystem so far and what's coming up. And your final evolution, a reason to use the fireworks. So let's have a look at the future. Looking forward, I don't want to lie to you. There's still a lot of work to do here. This has been in progress for a couple years, and we are just scratching the surface of what NextGen will become. And I want to stress that we're taking our time to get this right and really re-engineer Jira to scale into the future. But first, I just want to acknowledge something. I know NextGen has been quite disruptive for some of your apps, and I realize that our work to support ecosystem has been slow. Some of that is because we are rebuilding some of these fundamental concepts of Jira, and so it's taken time for the product to mature to a point where we could build stable integration points. But I'd like to use this talk as a promise that we will do better, and we are investing in ecosystem. We have a team that's just been spun up to work directly on NextGen API and integration points. So let's have a look at what they'll be getting up to. What's left to do? This is a little roadmap of what we've done so far. So last year we launched software projects for NextGen. Earlier this year we launched Service Desk. And what's coming next? So currently we're working on those REST APIs. We've released some support for new entities recently. And as I mentioned, we're working on the write APIs for REST endpoints. As for workflows, I know a lot of apps rely on integration with workflow. As I mentioned, workflows, the functionality is still being developed for NextGen projects in general. So that will be prioritized, but it's a little bit in the future. Finally, sharing configuration. I can think a lot of you, I can imagine what a lot of you are thinking in that, sure, NextGen's great, but like how do you actually share configuration across multiple projects? It's kind of missing that, right? So I can't share too much here. It's still a bit in the future. I have to be very vague, I've been told. But I can give you an idea of what to expect. Basically, we are going to look at sharing project configuration as a whole rather than as the individual parts to hope that that achieves less complexity. So as we wrap up, I want you to think about why you should care about NextGen. And I see 3 strong reasons why you should. Firstly, growth. So NextGen really helps us grow. It expands our total addressable market. It brings in more new customers. More people understand Jira better. So we need NextGen to keep growing our customer base. And what that means is more customers for us, more customers for you. Secondly, scale. So NextGen provides us a unique opportunity to re-engineer Jira for scale as we rethink how Jira should work in a cloud environment. And we want to really build a product in Jira that scales and is extensible not only now, but into the future. Finally, NextGen is our chance to do better. This is our big bet on how we can really improve the product. And we don't want to just do better for our customers, but do better for you as vendors as well. We'd really love it if you could embrace NextGen as strongly as we have by either updating your APIs where you can, simplifying your app in NextGen if it can be simplified due to simpler Jira configuration, or at least keeping the new conceptual model of NextGen in mind when you build your next great app. I really hope you'll take this journey with us on NextGen, and on that note, I'd like to ask you a favor. So we'd really love your input on what we should do next. So I would love it if you could please go to an instance, create a NextGen project, try out your app in it, and see what works, see what doesn't work, things that you can fix that you can't fix yet because you're waiting on us, anything that's blocking you, we'd love all that feedback. So this is the slide you can take a photo of. Head to this link, go.atlassian.com/ngapps. That's one of our ecosystem tickets where we'll be collecting feedback for this. For software, this is easy. You can head to any instance and just enable or just create a NextGen project. But for JSD, you'll need to head to a certain URL to enable that. For Jira Service Desk, although we did release only earlier this year, we are reaching parity with classic JSD features. So if you have a Service Desk app, it's great if you could test out that it works properly there. And with your help, we can turn Jira configuration from something that new users might look at like this into a relationship a little bit more friendly like this. Thank you.